Hello and welcome. We're going to be talking today about ethics in artificial intelligence and machine learning from a business and cyber risk perspective. And we're going to be discussing, some of the important reasons why we need to think about ethics in AI and ML. A lot of people may not have started thinking about the ethical side of technology and computing. It's a fairly nascent or new area for many people, and I have to say, when I first heard of ethics and technology, a part of me, I've been in the industry for 30 years, and I heard ethics and technology, and I was like, what does that even mean? And why do we need it? But as you start to explore the uses and the importance of what we're going to be doing with machine learning and artificial intelligence in our world, and in fact what we've already done in some cases, then the ethics part really starts to make an important thing to look at, an important dimension to understand. There is questions from the audience, and actually, thank you. Somebody has already created a question, so that's great. Please, if you do have questions, please enter them in. I am driving this bus alone today, though, and I'm not the best at talking and walking and chewing gum at the same time. So in other words, if I don't get to your question immediately, it's just because I didn't necessarily see it right away, or it's going to fit in a later part in the discussion. But please do share your questions and feel free to enter them in when they come to you, because I know that for me, I'll think of a question while somebody's talking, and then it goes out of my head 5 minutes later. So please jot them down, and I will get to them as well as I can. So to get started with this discussion on ethics in AI and ML, it actually helps to understand why it's important to have diversity and inclusion. Because when we look at what AI and machine learning are doing, a lot of what they're doing is creating automation, whether it's automation in a customer service environment. So you call, for example, your cable company, and instead of speaking to a person, you've got an agent or a bot on the other end that is interacting with you, that's running an AI. You also, as we look at things that are automated in technology, for example, with ML, like learning to read a radiograph better, for example. Using these kinds of applications with AI and ML, we also create the risk of having AI or ML that's not behaving in a non-biased manner. And what's one of the best ways to make sure that you're looking at bias? It's to bring in a diverse and inclusive team. And when we look at diversity and inclusion at Microsoft, for example, I've got the slide up here. It doesn't mean just being aware of diversity. It doesn't mean just saying, oh, we've hired, you create a chart and you say, we need 5 purple people and 5, pink people and 5 yellow people or something, like different colors, rainbow colors. I'm on purpose trying to just think of any color, green people, Martians or whatever. In any case, it's not just saying people have to be a particular color, they have to be a particular gender. It's more about creating this diverse environment that's actually inclusive too. So taking it from just a checkbox of we've got X people that fit this descriptor, to making sure that once you've created that diverse team, that diverse team has cognitive diversity. So people thinking in different ways, which is incredibly powerful. We forget oftentimes that we're kind of caught in our own heads. We think that we're open and that we understand we're not biased, but the thing about bias is that it can be very unconscious. So having a diverse team and an inclusive team can help everybody think more broadly and bring new ideas into the organization. It also means that inclusion part, that means respecting people and respecting their different ideas. Now, sometimes I'll say that and, people will say, well, some people have dumb ideas. Okay, this is true. I myself have to admit I've had some dumb ideas in my life. And it's not saying that by listening to everybody and respecting every idea means that every idea is a winner. It means that as a team, collectively, you assess the validity of that idea or that approach and then decide as a team whether or not you're going to move forward with one idea or another idea. So it's not everybody's idea is always right or the best one. It's about everybody is respected with their ideas and every idea is listened to and considered. And that's really where inclusiveness comes in, and allowing people to feel capable and comfortable with speaking up. Because a lot of times in teams, you'll start to see homogeneity increase because people want to fit in. And that's just a really natural thing. All human beings do it. I do it. We want to fit in with a group. So you start seeing, you can see people behaving a little bit more homogeneously, especially if having a different idea or an opposing idea is not respected or included. So diversity and inclusion, very important, and that means that not just checking the box, but also making sure people are heard and feel included and feel comfortable sharing their different ideas. Why would you want to do this in business? Well, because honestly, it's better for the business in the long run. And this is a figure that came out of a publication from the Korn Ferry Institute called the Inclusive Leader. And they used data that came from Catherine Phillips' research and Bruce Tuckman's framework. What they did was they looked at productivity and innovation within business teams over time. And at first, when you have a very homogeneous team, they're not diverse, they work really well together at the very beginning. So you can see on that line, right, the green line, they're going really well immediately. And it's in large part probably because they know how to work together. They are actually, very similar as a team already. They're not very diverse, so that there's not a lot of friction in that team, and they're getting productive really quickly. That makes sense. The diverse team, on the other hand, they're not going as quickly at the beginning. They're not as productive. They're not as innovative. It takes them a while, probably because they're figuring out how to work with each other. You've got diverse viewpoints, probably diverse ways of being. I've worked on some teams where the only way to get heard is to interrupt somebody, because that was just the culture of the team. It was all interruption, and people talked until they were interrupted. I worked on other teams where interruptions were considered, very invasive and were discouraged. You waited until somebody was finished, then you spoke, or you waited until the moderator, whoever was leading that meeting, asked for other people's opinions. So diverse teams, it's not that there's a right and a wrong way to work together as a team. It's that different teams have different ways of working together. So when you bring together this diverse group, they probably have to create their own team rules. But over time, once that diverse team has created their groundwork and their rules, then their performance goes way up. And as you can see, in the long run, they're doing better. They're outperforming the very similar, the non-diverse team. And this could in large part be because they've got those different ideas that they're bringing to the table that the diverse team can bring, but the non-diverse team isn't bringing. The next thing to consider when you're looking at ethics, so what is the importance of diversity and inclusion? And we'll talk about that now in AI and ML in a bit. The other aspect to really think about that you may not have looked at closely before is bias, and the kinds of bias that we have as human beings. Now, again, bias is a really interesting thing because it's really hard to get inside your own head and understand when you are biased. But we all carry different levels and different types of biases. So here's just a little bit of information about some of the different typical biases that are there. And remember that micro behaviors can actually have a significant impact, especially when you're working with these diverse teams. So it's important, even things like pronouns. What pronouns are you using to address people? Being careful that you've asked about the right pronouns, because if you don't, it's possible that you're offending somebody on the team. So you want to make sure that you understand you don't want to trigger negative impact, and that you take a look at your own bias. So here, the first one here is affinity bias, and that's because somebody has similar ideas or thoughts or approaches as you do, that you feel like, oh, well, there's somebody that that you kind of get along with them. And I actually had this as an example for me a few years ago when I was working as a research analyst at the Burton Group. Oh, no, actually it was when I was an analyst, I think, at Hurwitz Group before that. In any case, an analyst relations rep. So there are people, some large vendors will hire somebody who just focuses on the analyst world. They talk to the research analysts of the world, research analyst teams. If you haven't heard of Burton, it's now part of Gartner for technical professionals, but Forrester's an example of a research analyst team, 451. And these analyst relations people get to know the analysts because when they're writing a report, they want to make sure that the company they work for, that the products are presented fairly and well. Well, there was an AR, analyst relations person, who put up a slide about me when I was an analyst to a vendor that a friend of mine happened to work at the time. And it said some stuff about me. It said I was hard to work with. He used the B word. and that I was very technical, so be careful, because I would call people out if they got the technology wrong, which I think is why I ended up getting called the B word on that slide. But it ended with, ask her about her pets. She really loves her dogs and her cats. So ask her about that, because it'll help her warm up. And I realized, oh my gosh, he got me, right? He nailed that I had an affinity bias that I wasn't even really aware of, but it's true. You start talking to me about your dogs and your cats, and I'm like, oh, I have dogs and cats. So I had this affinity bias that I wasn't aware of until I saw that somebody had actually identified it about me and kind of weaponized it in a way to make me, as an analyst, be more connected to their product. There's also benevolence bias, and this is people trying to be caring. We really want to be good people. So attempting how to be caring, and that bias. And for the people that are writing in about AI and ML, yep, we're going to talk about ethics in AI and ML, but this is the how we get to the ethical point. So I want to be clear, this is not a highly technical conversation. This is really about the ethics and the business considerations, and it's important to understand bias for that. So benevolence bias is if you want people to think that you're doing the right thing, you may have different behavior around that. And then confirmation bias is a really common one too, that many of us don't realize that we're doing. What we do is we actually, when we agree on something, we've made a decision, we're going to buy something, for example, then we confirm that it was the right thing to purchase. So we have this confirmation that was the right thing to do. It's sort of the opposite of buyer's remorse. Where you see this coming up in technology, for example, is if you think, and where it would impact ML, is if you think that you've created the right model, then you may, with your confirmation bias, want it to be operating the way it's expected. So you may be confirming that it's operating that way without understanding that there's a little bit of bias involved. And to know that some of the confirmation bias, we actually all live this every day when we're writing. If you've ever written a piece and it got edited later and you realized that you had read it, you proofread it, but you still missed commas or a couple of typos, that's because our brain kind of leaps ahead and fills things in. So we create this confirmation. So bias, why is it important in AI and ML? It's important because we're not always aware of it, and that's, again, where the diverse teams can help. Why does AI and ML, why does this matter right now so much for the world and for our industry? Because it's a huge, huge market, and organizations are using it for a variety of different solution sets. So it's in cybersecurity, we're using AI and ML to identify malware more quickly and to be able to eradicate those the malware or the attackers as quickly as possible, to help create information for analysts so that they can respond and be able to do research and write reports more quickly. In the outside of cybersecurity, we're using AI and ML for a variety of different purposes, helping people that are blind to be able to read street signs or to understand what's happening around them, because the AI can translate and see for them and translate for them, using for autonomous driving so that hopefully we can have fewer car accidents in the future. This is a really, really important stuff. So we're going to be using it more and more, and that means that it's really time to think about what we're doing ethically with these systems. Okay, so what can go wrong in AI and ML if somebody gets it wrong? Anybody, I don't know if you've heard of Tay or Taybot, but Taybot is an example of Microsoft not getting it right. So we got this wrong. We put out a bot, and it was the natural language team that wanted to see if they could get the bot to acquire natural language and to understand how it acquired natural language, and looked for a venue where there'd be a lot of natural language going on and a lot of opportunity for interaction with Taybot. Taybot was represented as what it was. It was AI. It was a test. So we didn't try and fool anybody. We weren't trying to Turing test people, so that they thought that Tay was actually a human being. It was clear that it was a bot. And Tay started out on Twitter, and the very first thing that Tay tweeted was, "I like humans," or "I love humans." So Tay was like super positive and a very happy bot, if you could say happy bot. And then within about 24 hours, Tay had been misused and was saying incredibly racist things. And so Tay was removed from Twitter, and Microsoft issued an apology about some of the racist, well, for the things that Tay had been saying that were racist. And to give you, you can look it up for, there are still articles about the stuff that Tay said, but to give you an idea, one thing was Hitler was right. And I won't even repeat what was in the rest of that tweet, but you know, it was some pretty bad stuff, but it was because people were saying that to Tay and trying to get Tay to repeat these really offensive things. So what can go wrong? Well, in this case, instead of this bot just learning natural language and understanding Twitter and starting to learn about how to communicate on Twitter, was misused and was now spewing very hateful, racist rhetoric. So do we have to get this right? Yeah, it's important to continue to think about what we have to do and build in AI and ML to get it right, because we don't want to have something. Now with Tay, it was an embarrassment for the company and that we had to apologize. But what if this was something that was really a critical kind of impact, like a plane came down or there was too much radiation in a machine? These kinds of things. These can actually could lead potentially to loss of life. So we have to think about these issues right now. As Microsoft thinks about them, we've actually put out a book called The Future Computed, and it's a booklet, and it's a PDF, you can download it. It was just updated again this year. And in The Future Computed, we take a look at the dimensions about the ethics of responsible AI and machine learning. And there are 6 different major components. Fairness, ensuring that the AI and the ML are going to be fair to the people that are using it and to those people that may be impacted by the decisions of that AI or that ML. Reliability and safety are another example. So, for example, looking at how reliable can you guarantee that, or do you have a high level of assurance that machine learning algorithm is going to be reliable and give out reliable responses? And an example here would be if you're using it for a radiograph, for example, can you rely on it to give you really good advice about a really good classification of whether or not, for example, something is cancerous or not? And safety. It also has to be, in the reliable part, it has to be resilient, because you want to make sure that the attackers aren't able to game your AI or your ML. In a sense, right, the Tay bot was gamed, so that Tay was misused and then was spouting a racist rhetoric. Reliable, we want to make sure that you can't game machine learning algorithms either, so that the attacker could get an outcome that they prefer. Thinking about, a lot of investment companies now are using robo-advisors. And those advisors, they reason over the activity in the marketplace and make good decisions. But it's hopefully make good decisions to increase the value of your portfolio. However, it's possible to think about an attacker trying to do an automated pump and dump kind of scheme to trick the advisor to do something that it wouldn't do under normal circumstances. So reliability also includes that resilience from attack. Privacy and security. As we look at how these systems are being used, we want to make sure that they're going to be secure for us and that we're not violating anybody's privacy. So you think about things like facial recognition. And using facial recognition, it's now starting at some airports. I was boarding a plane the other day, and they wanted to take a picture of my face in order to let me board the plane. So how does that information from that person's face, how do we use that? And is that going to be, are we helping to protect people's privacy, or are we now taking away some of their privacy? And it's really important to ensure that we're protecting privacy as we're deploying new technology. That inclusiveness piece, if you're wondering how could AI or ML not be inclusive, for example, there's an infamous example of those automated washing machine systems. They're designed, right? Artificial intelligence in the sense that it auto-senses when your hand goes in front of the spigot, and then it turns on automatically for you. Well, how does it identify that it's a person or not a person? Some of these automatic sensors were tuned so that depending on the color of your skin, it wouldn't turn on. So for lighter-skinned people, they were working as expected. For darker-skinned people, they were not. So this was very not inclusive, and it was actually bias because of that. Transparency, how do these systems work? What kind of data are you feeding into the system? Why did you feed that data? And how are you supervising the findings that come out of the AI and ML? This is going to become more and more important as we use AI and ML to make decisions like you do or you don't have cancer, so you're going to have cancer treatment. Or if you're looking at people being sentenced, are you a risk to society? Should you be able to have should you get bail? How long should your sentence be? You know, these kinds of questions are, as we start asking AI and ML machines to make these kinds of decisions, or at least to inform human decisions, we want to be transparent about how they're doing that and what kind of data they're basing those decisions on. And then accountability, and this starts getting into legal aspects. What if the AI or the ML has made a decision? And again, let's go back to the cancer example. You don't have cancer from the radiograph. That's what the machine learning algorithm said. And then this person doesn't get treatment for cancer. What if it turns out they really had cancer? Who's going to be who's accountable for that? If you're using an automated bot to shut down your firewall if there's an attack, but it doesn't actually shut it down because it doesn't understand the attack is truly malicious. Who's going to be responsible and accountable for that? And then there's this other interesting area, which is a little bit outside of the realm of this discussion, but there's another area that people are looking at too, where what about if we start getting, should we have protections for the bots themselves? And if you remember that robot that was hitchhiking around the world, it got to the United States, and I don't think it got past Pennsylvania because somebody attacked this hitchhiking robot. So do we have to protect rights for robots? Is that something that's going to be that we have to do in the future? And who will be accountable for that? So a lot of different questions, and I have to admit, there aren't easy answers right now. This is not a conversation where I can say, hey, you guys, at the end of this 45 minutes, you're going to know everything and be able to solve all of these problems. This is really more about us as a world and a community getting together and at least having the conversations that we need to have about ethics and AI and privacy and security and how that's going to be in ML going forward. It's not necessarily that all the answers have already been laid out. Right. So I have a question here that I think fits right in with the privacy and security, which is privacy defined as the right of informational self-determination, the right of a human to control their personal information wherever it exists. I guess the question is that, I mean, that's certainly one definition of privacy, is do people have control over their information, and do they have a right to keep that information private? That's a component of privacy. Privacy, if you look at, gets defined differently by different laws. GDPR has included in privacy the right to be forgotten, for example. But the ability to control your data and be able to keep some of your data safe and private for yourself is a really important component of privacy definitions itself. And then specifically, how do we bring that into AI and ML? The other thing about security, looking at AI and ML, is thinking a little bit about the attackers and how they may start to use not just the misuse case against the algorithms, but also looking at they may start to use, and in fact there are some reports that they're starting to use AI and ML offensively in order to, for example, be better at convincing us that, rather than it's a 409 kind of, there's a Nigerian prince who says, if you give me $500,000, I'll give you a few $1 million. They're using some of these tools and techniques to look at who they are on social media and then craft very, very targeted, laser-focused kind of phishing emails, very likely to get people to click. So it's going to be interesting also to watch how our adversaries are using AI and ML in the future. Some other things in privacy and security is making sure that you're using these tools to identify these abnormal behaviors, and hopefully in the cyberspace, abnormal behaviors that are a little bit under the radar for people to be able to find as potentially an indicator of compromise themselves. making sure that the AI and ML is not going to be able to be manipulated or coerced. So that you not, I had the example of the pump and dump scheme, for example. You also don't want to, if you've got an autonomous car, for example, you don't want somebody to be able to game that car to make it shut off at a high speed and cause a big accident. So you make sure that we're making this very resilient AI so that it's not going to be manipulated or attacked. And then some of the things with the algorithms, making sure that they're secure by design, that bias has been removed, and that you've classified and put in the right amount, the right kind of data. And if you're wondering, like, well, what's the right kind of data necessarily? It doesn't always mean the existing data. And another really well-known example in the AI and ML space is that one company was using their existing group of engineers to base how they were going to assess new resumes for job openings. And the existing group of engineers were pretty homogenous. It was a number of it was very heavily male, and they had fairly similar backgrounds. And that doesn't mean that that's the only person who can write code well. And in fact, as we talked about, the diversity, so hopefully you're seeing it all come together. Diversity matters. They make stronger teams. So if you're just hiring for the engineers that you already have, you're not necessarily getting the best or the strongest team. So understanding, who's designed the algorithms, who's figured out the data, being able to identify if any data has been introduced maliciously. So this is different than you got a bad data set that was already biased, but protecting against the introduction from the attackers. And then rejecting training data that may have negative impacts on the results. So looking at the training data and making sure that you're training into the system the right kind of data, and that it's helping to train the system to give better results. And examples can even be things like tagging different kinds of meanings so it can be contextualized more effectively. So in natural learning, for example, if you use the word salt, you want to make sure that you're giving the training data that uses salt properly in a cybersecurity space, right? That would be around cryptography. It wouldn't be around seasoning your food. So making sure that that training data has been classified properly, tagged properly, and is going to help you to get the better results that you're looking for. So transparency, again, this is the ability and the right for people to understand what's happening within their AI and have the accountability. So making sure that the actions that the AI or the ML is taking are verifiably correct, legally defensible, because again, this is going to be something, especially when we get into accountability, there will be some questions about whose fault is it if something goes wrong. If an AI bot or an ML algorithm, if an AI bot takes an activity or an action, or an ML algorithm is now the information and the recommendation from that algorithm is taken by a human being, coming back and figuring out was that legally defensible and can you prove it? And then making sure that there's a log and an audit trail. And if you've been in IT for a while, you're like, yeah, logs and audits. But again, really, really important in AI and ML and the practice of it, because if you go back, if there is a liability issue, if there is a question about if something was legal, if it was correct, being able to understand where in the system that occurred. That doesn't always mean understanding the decisions within the deep learning or the neural network, because you don't always see it in the black box. You don't see how the weights are, but you certainly can see what data was sent in to that algorithm, and then the finding or the recommendation that came out on the other side, and making sure that you log that kind of activity. Who trained the system, who tagged to the data that went into the system, who took the information that came out of the system, and how did they choose and decide to act on it. These kinds of things we can have for forensics and event tracing. Diversity again. It really does play a big part in AI and ML, although it may not be as clear initially. One is in the teams that are creating the algorithms, creating the AI, and also to get the right skill set for people that come in to bring their different viewpoints. And it doesn't just mean within engineering, but also bringing in things like the human aspects. It's important that lawyers are part of the teams that are working on these algorithms, and that for privacy considerations. Lawyers they focus on privacy quite a lot in the technical space. You may need HR involved if this is a bot that's going to be going over people's resumes and deciding who to hire or who to recommend for a promotion, for example. So getting people like HR involved, getting a variety of different viewpoints and different skill sets, having cybersecurity involved so that they can help with that resiliency and that security and making sure that the AI isn't going to be gamed. So having humanities and people from the humanities involved is going to help with the diversity in AI and ML so that we don't get automated bias, we don't create these systems that are doing something that they're not intended to do. Again, if you don't think that a lack of diversity has something to do with TechBro AI, this is a really great piece here that was in the MIT Technology Review talking about the dangers of quote-unquote TechBro AI. And again, like with hiring, for example, hiring people that all look the same rather than giving a more diverse viewpoint and allowing people that have the right skill set to come in rather than being something that happens to look like a cookie cutter of the people that are already doing that job. An example in the real world of where, looking at one group and not another group actually has human impact, life impact implications is with airbags. So airbags are designed for there was a standard crash test dummy, and that crash test dummy was based on the average male in the United States, which means that people who are much shorter than the average male, and a lot of those people tend to be, women, children, were not as part of the tests of the airbags. So what happened was airbags, when they deployed, they actually were crushing the shorter people, and in some cases could kill them. So you might think, hey, what does that mean in the physical world and technology? But this is an example of not bringing that diverse group into the conversation so that we're just repeating the same things again, and it can actually have really major impact. So we know that in cybersecurity, for example, there's a real need. We've got a skills gap. We've got to hire up a number of people to fill these millions of jobs that are out there. If we're just looking at cookie cutter people, we're not going to be able to fill all those jobs. We're also not necessarily going to bring to bear the best responses to attacks because our attackers, our adversaries, are a very diverse group. So we also have to think about being a diverse group as we fight and protect our systems. How is work going to change? So this is on the business aspect, because a lot of people are concerned that AI is about replacing human beings. Now, there's not going to be anybody on the shop floor. It's going to be all automated. There won't be any truck drivers. There won't be any taxi drivers or Lyft and Uber drivers, because it's all going to be automated. And work will change. Anytime there's a major change in technology or society, we do see jobs changing. I don't know if you know what a farrier is, but a farrier is the person who puts the horseshoes on a horse. So being a farrier was a really super popular kind of job 150 years ago. Not so much now, because we don't use horses for transportation the way that we used to before cars became into common use. So will work change? It will, but this doesn't mean that all the jobs are going away or there won't be any jobs for human beings. It does, however, mean that we have to think about how work is going to change and help to prepare our organizations and our workforce for the next phase. So looking here, for example, of, here's the example of radiology, where you've got a number of factors that come into it. So there's the vision, being able to read the radiograph. The analysis, is this radiograph showing me that there's cancer on here or that there's a broken bone, and how is that bone broken? And then decision making. Now that we've got the analysis, what's going to happen? What do we do? What's the treatment plan, for example? And in that case, you can automate quite a bit. You can actually probably, if we can train these systems really well, it's possible that the system's going to be better at reading the radiograph than a human, but the human is going to be the one that's going to create the treatment plan. In language, for example, translators and interpreters, this is something that we've seen really promising work already. If you've ever used an automated AI translator, it's pretty amazing. And there are actually, some of them can do it just out in real time as you're speaking. It auto-translates and will then print out what you're saying at a very high level of accuracy. So this is something where, will we still need to have human translators? Most likely there will be use cases that still need human translators, but we can have a lot of that work now either done by the AI or for people that wouldn't be able to afford translators in the past. Now they can go to a foreign country and have a conversation, at least a little stilted because you got to show the translation, but you can at least have this now. So it was something that wasn't available before. And some jobs are just not going to be replaced by the AI at all. There are some things that humans do very well, and one of those is interacting with other humans. So nurses, for example, looking at a physical therapy person, a therapist, social workers, being with human beings, talking to human beings. These are things that, while there have been some AI projects where they've brought like robotic dogs, for example, into nursing homes to help soothe the people in the nursing homes. Still, having a person there or having a real dog there actually is still more effective. So some jobs are not going to necessarily go away entirely. And what's most promising is how AI and people together are going to be even better. And this is where the very interesting and powerful parts come in, is that how do we bring it together so that we're able to allow people to do things they couldn't before. So I gave the example earlier about AI translating for people. And here's this example, with blind people, being able to use AI to translate the road signs that they're seeing, the activity that's going on around them. So giving them that power that they just didn't have before. With speech and language, for example, helping people who are deaf. So maybe it's not that they don't speak the language necessarily, but they can't hear you at all. Being able to now use that with the AI, and then knowledge in mental health, for example, helping people to understand where have we seen this before and what did that mean for that person, and maybe being able to do some really interesting research so that you can get broader views across a group of people and understand this kind of behavior manifests, and that often leads to perhaps another kind of behavior. So starting to take these massive amounts of data and hopefully seeing some patterns in them, that can help certainly in mental health. It can also help, we see this in cybersecurity a lot, where there's just too much data for people to go through and to reason over and to be able to always find out that there's something that's going wrong. Attackers can be very good at going low and slow, and there's a lot of data to get through. As an example of what a lot means, it's in Azure, for example, there are 6.5 trillion security signals every single day. Now that's a whole lot. That's more than most human beings could get through. I think it maybe any human being could get through. But when you have AI and ML to help with that, then you are able to see these small, low and slow patterns that you might not have seen otherwise. So that's helping the humans. The humans still probably have to do the investigation, would have to make the decision if, for example, you're going to re-image a machine, shut down a server, take some other kind of action on the network. But they're better at being able to respond because they have been informed by the information coming from the ML. So it's looking at what we can do with AI and ML to make people better, and not just focusing on what it is that they're replacing, because there's still a lot of jobs that people do that are much better than what we've got, than what the machines do. So we want to make sure that we allow that. The other thing is that there's going to be some jobs that AI creates. Already there's a data scientist, the role of the data scientist, and there are data security scientists, people who are going to spend their time working on creating tagging the data that's going to teach the models, that are working on creating better AI, how that AI is going to acquire things like natural language so that it can interact with humans more effectively. There are a whole number of different jobs that are going to be created. Just as when the horses stopped being used and we started using cars, yes, farriers weren't as in demand a career, but car mechanic became a career. So as you're looking at AI, and again, this is part of the ethics, is thinking about how your company or your organization or you as an individual are going to be using it, and also how you can then plan for the next generation of jobs and the kinds of people that are going to be needed. So, examples here, things like biohackers or IoT data analysts and other jobs that I don't think we've even thought of yet, but as we continue to advance this technology, there will be jobs that come along with it. And that also does beg the question, though, of how do we equip people for that next level. So, and that's, again, there aren't necessarily easy, this isn't, that kind of talk where it's, I have all the answers. This is really more a communication and a conversation kind of talk. So how do we equip people with the skills so that in the new economy and with AI and ML, that they're going to be effective? And that probably means helping them to understand technology, be very comfortable with tools, comfortable with coding, comfortable with what AI and ML are, so that as we start to use these in more and more of the facets of our lives, that we're able to use them in a way that's ethical, that's transparent, that's fair, that's secure, that's reliable, and that is helping people to be better and not just looking at, either being biased, automating the bias, or taking jobs away from people. So that's the core of the talk. I know that some questions have been coming in, and as I said, I'm not great at both reading things and responding at the same time. I know some people can read and talk at the same time. I'm not great at doing that. So I'm just going to go through these questions, which is like, so this first one is that talking about the theme of ethics in AI. So, okay, yeah, so I'm not quite sure about this question. They feel that we didn't talk about ethics, but okay. So I apologize to that person, but that this wasn't exactly what you wanted to hear. So the next one is about diversity does have benefits, but my attempt to illustrate it was sexist. Okay, thank you. I did not mean it to be sexist. I was actually presenting an actual case where the engineers were, in fact, predominantly male, but that's great, interesting feedback, and I will look at seeing if there are other researched, studied, published cases that aren't just looking at engineers. So thank you. Let's see. So here's the question on should implementers of AI and ML be held responsible for the unintended outcomes, biases, or downstream damage caused indirectly from the use of the technology? And I mean, that's a great question, and I don't think that there aren't necessarily easy answers yet. I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out in the future. But it's important to think about it if you are either purchasing AI and ML or you're creating and generating it. I think these are conversations that you want to sit down and have with the lawyers to talk about if we're using this and something goes wrong, what kind of recourse we have, and if you're creating it, making sure that you've created your AI or your ML in a way that you feel very confident is legally defensible should something go wrong after you've sold it and it's been used. Okay, so I think that's the core of the questions that came in. If anybody else has, no, so there are no new questions. Oh wait, okay, so what jobs or careers are you saying that ML and AI could actually create outside of research-based computing? Well, actually, data science it's not just research, it's not just in universities. So data science is a growing field in a number of different companies, for example. So vendors and organizations are hiring up research data scientists to make sure that they're, and data scientists themselves, so they're applying what they're doing within organizations. Also, interestingly enough, there are lawyers that are now focusing on the ethics of AI and ML, and there's actually a company up in Canada that I was just talking with last week, INQ, that is focusing on, it's a law firm that's focused specifically on this space. So there's just a couple of examples of some of the new jobs that can be created with AI and ML itself. Also, as people get better at using it, you may find that they're in a SOC environment, for example, that there may be new kinds of jobs for people to do in cybersecurity in the SOC with AI and ML. So it's going to be emerging, but there are definitely new areas that are just not. It's not only research and not only higher ed based. Okay, so that looks like we've got the questions that came in. Oh, we got one more, sorry. How would you propose to address cases of anomaly detection algorithms that are biased against small minority groups as anomalies? Yeah, there's been research that's been published about, for example, for trans people being misgendered or being excluded because they're not being because the tool is not identifying them properly. So I know that there's some research going on to see how to eliminate that kind of bias from the tooling, but I don't know if there have been any solutions yet. But it is a great point, and it's another good example that, for example, trans people feeling very erased by some of the tools that identify them as a particular gender. So this is some work. Again, these aren't simple answers. This is more about having a conversation about some of the things that we need to think about, and that's a really good example. So thank you very much for that question. Okay, well, I thank you all very much for a quarter of. I appreciate the engagement and some of the instructions. So thank you very much. It's always good to have more talks. I will endeavor to be less sexist in my examples. So that was thank you for that comment, and thank you everybody who listened. I hope that you learned a little bit about ethics in AI and ML, and maybe now are inspired to go read books like Future Computed or some of the books by Yuval Harari has a really good book on some of these bigger problems that we have to think about as a society. As we lean more and more on this technology, it's really imperative that we make sure that we've thought through the potential for bias and for lack of inclusion in this technology as we use it. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.